Hey, what's going on, folks? Welcome back to the Graphic Design is Fun podcast. My name's Dan. Today we are chatting with the one and only Scott Fuller of the Studio Temporary in Atlanta, Georgia, USA. Scott is a graphic designer and illustrator. He's done work for tons and tons of brands in Atlanta, everything from Coca-Cola to just about every major sports team in Atlanta to rapper Killer Mike of Run the Jewels, just to name a few. He's a teacher. He runs design workshops, one of which I actually attended right at the beginning of the pandemic, virtual workshop, and it was fantastic. I've been following Scott for a long time. He's a great guy, super hard worker, and we had a great conversation. It got personal, actually. We kind of delved into the behind the scenes, what goes into this work and some of the struggles he's been through between being laid off from jobs, being evicted from his home, some tough stuff. And I really appreciated Scott's openness and his honesty talking about this stuff. But we talk about lots of other stuff. We also talk about the origins of his studio, the Studio Temporary, and also where that name comes from. We talk about his love of designing fonts, some of his favorite graphic design books, all kinds of good stuff in this episode. Now, as always, everything we mention is linked in the description, and there's a lot of it in this one. Scott references a lot of designers, a lot of agencies, a lot of books. So if there's anything that you've never heard of, you can click the links in the description and read all about it. There are also going to be links, of course, to Scott's website and his Instagram if you want to check out his work. Highly recommend it. But hey, without further ado, let's get into the episode. Please enjoy this conversation with Scott Fuller. And this is a question I think you're familiar with. What is the most important tool in your studio?
My head.
There we go.
I read that this was right when I started the studio. I called it the Studio Temporary as a joke. This was 10 years ago, a little over 10 and a half years ago. I started I was in the back of an old sign shop in the middle of downtown Noonan. This is like 1 a.m, right? And I got to be up the next morning at like 6 to go to my job. So I'm sitting there and, just as a joke, I'm like, I'm gonna call this place the Studio Temporary. That was back the time when like everybody was working in coffee shops. Like that was a big deal. You're working at Starbucks, you're working at Dunkin', you're working at all these like high end, whatever type of coffee shops. And I remember a couple weeks later, I read an interview by a man by the name of Alan Fletcher, who's one of the original partners of Pentagram. And he was asked what the most important tool in the studio was. His answer was my head. And I remember I've been getting a little bit of flack, like the Studio Temporary. What does that mean? It's a long name, whatever. But the moment I heard that, I went, yeah, I'm sticking with this. So that's definitely where that goes.
Yeah, it's a great origin story. And it makes a lot of sense. Like I can see why people might be like, so Studio Temporary, what does that mean? But like this idea of like whether or not, I'm in the back of a print shop or I'm at Starbucks or I'm in, my office, that's kind of irrelevant. It's sort of like it's all in your head. That's what matters.
I know. I mean, so funny, I almost called it backpack back in the day. I mean, literally just kind of carrying everything around in my bag, and it just worked.
Yeah. Speaking of sort of the origins of your studio, if we could take it back even further to your career, how you got into design. You were studying engineering originally and then switched to design. Is that true?
So I got a scholarship for design. And when I went to visit the campus and everything like that, I, went around with the tour guide, going to a couple of classes. About 10 minutes into the first class, I snuck out and went to the I went to the art department. I had just taken my first art class ever that year, and I just fell in love. I knew that was exactly what I wanted to do. So, I had done trig and physics and calculus and all that type of stuff in high school.
Yeah.
My dad's a machinist, so I was ready for that. But I just couldn't get past that. Um, so I went in there, did fine art for about a year and a half, and at the end of a year and a half, I was just done. I couldn't stand art. I couldn't stand just looking at something and drawing. And it was like fine art, right? It's like pen and pencil, oil painting, like that type of thing. And it's like I never felt like I was actually creating anything new. And I understand there's a whole line of thought and argument and everything like that. But just me personally, that was how I felt. So I was about one mouse click away from just blowing the whole thing up and going back to mechanical engineering. And then I took a design class that last semester, and that was all she wrote. I knew that was exactly what I was looking for.
And was that like a graphic design class?
Yeah. Yeah, it was a graphic design class. I remember I remember actually if we go back to my freshman year when I was still doing fine art, we still all had to take like, principles of design and stuff like that. There was an old teacher there, Mr. DeGangi, and he was an incredible painter, illustrator, drawer, fine artist, but he was a master sculptor. I mean, like nothing I've ever seen. And I remember he had a test that he would give during the class, and I actually give this same test. I've taught a couple years at Portfolio Center now, and I actually give the same test to my kids. Basically, he drew a shape up on the chalkboard. In this particular instance, it was like three stairs, so just like left, down, left, down, left, down. You know what I mean?
Right, right, right.
Instead, you have a couple minutes to like 5 minutes, whatever, to come up with as many things you can using this. And we had like a couple of folks filled up a page or like, did some other stuff. I half a page, maybe if I'm back. I filled up 5 pages worth of stuff.
Wow.
And this was like my first class, right? And I remember he came through and was looking at my stuff and he called me up to the front of the room after class. And I'm like, oh, great, my first class. I'm already in trouble, right? And he calls me up there and he said, what's your major? And I said, well, I'm studio art, fine art. He said, you sure about that? Speaking I'm like, well, what did you think? He said, I thought you were graphic design. And, then a year and a half later, I'm back and I realized, you know what? He was right. But I had to go through that whole bit and realize, hey, that was it. That was what I wanted to do. And I was obsessed. I remember going to the How conference. It came to Atlanta, and this is 2007 in the summer. And I remember I got to meet Chip Kidd. I got to meet Steph Geisbuehler. I got to meet all these insane designers. I got to discover things that I didn't even know existed. I got to meet vendors. I got to meet other designers that were local. I got to meet agencies. I got to meet just legends of the craft, right? And I did not, like I said, didn't even know any of this stuff existed. I remember that was right at the beginning of the summer. I spent the next 2.5 months just buried in the mountain of stuff that I brought back from the conference. And then that's when I realized, yeah, I may not have like this opportunity or this type of education or something like that, but it's the work you put in behind the scenes that nobody sees. That's what, you know, the type of work that I'm able to put out is not is a direct reflection of how much work I put into this stuff. And that's something that's always kind of stuck in my craw from the very beginning.
Yeah, yeah. And were you creative and kind of into art as a kid, I would assume, going into fine art?
Yeah, I mean, we always drew and, did a bunch of stuff like that as a kid. I mean, had the colored pencils and, you know, bad watercolors and everything like that. I did so much of that. I grew up in the era of like, what was it like, the Hot Rod magazine or like Lowrider and stuff like that. So I was constantly drawing like anything mechanical for buddies and doing different things like that. That was my big bit. So I knew it was something that I loved, but I never thought that either A, that I could make a career of it, or B, that such a career even existed. So when I discovered that in college, I was just thrilled. Just the amount of creation and doing something new and not just making something to make something, but making something that has a purpose, a logo for a company, packaging for energy drinks, uniform designs for an NBA team, like all of this type of stuff that has an actual, for me, in my mind, like I said, this has actual, real, true purpose to it. And that was a big thing for me. So that was the thing that just kind of, put me over the edge.
Okay, well, and speaking of making a career out of it, I know you had some tough years after graduating. You graduated in 2008, bit of a tough time, and
A
we're
little
kind of
bit.
in and out of working. What was that like, and how, how did that eventually lead you to starting your own studio?
I mean, I wanted to start my own studio from the very beginning. I remember my first internship, right out of college. I remember getting a chance to talk with the founder, and one of the first things that I asked her was, I want to start my own studio. How, what is the best way to really go about that? What are some
Wow.
tips like and whatnot? And her answer was, oh, you're not ready. That was the first, and I'm like, I know this. I'm 6 months, I'm not even 6 months out of college. I know I'm not ready. That's why I'm asking you. I remember I just kind of left the little interview like almost immediately after that because I'm like, this is not going to go the way I want it to go,
Mhm.
and I just said that, I know there's a lot of stuff to do. I know there's a lot of things, stuff to learn. It's all right. So that's it. You know, I'm my mom on my own, and we'll see what happens. And then market crashes, couldn't find a job for a couple years, finally landed in an Apple store, stole the computer to the right guy, got a 2+ years of running the director of in-house design at a trucking company to, back in lamb again to being evicted to just, into a Minuteman press and a subway and all these different things. And this wasn't that long ago, I mean, y'all think this is, decades ago. It really wasn't.
Yeah.
So, to go from that and then finally, hey, found a place for you, senior designer, moved from Noonan where I, grew up, lived pretty much my entire life, moved up here to where we are now. And then a year in, some guy messes up at the company, to the tune of about, I don't know, millions of dollars. They start letting like 20%, let like 20% of the company go in like a day. And I was one of the first person on my team to get let go. Which was is like a last one hired, type of a deal. And I walked out, you know, was supposed to meet Julie and Sean, my wife and my little boy for lunch that day, and walked out carrying a box of my stuff. So she said, if you're going to start the studio, start it now. So we did. That was 7.5 years ago.
Wow. I mean,
Still a lot of craziness that's happened between now and then, but we're stronger than we've ever been. The work that's coming in is ridiculous, and just big companies, small companies, big agencies, small agencies, folks around the corner, my buddies around this, my buddies up the road. I'm kind of getting a chance to do it all. Most of my career was in-house, like 90% of my career was in-house. So I knew that doing this, that I wanted to work on everything I possibly could, any client that I could possibly find. I've worked with tech, I've worked with restaurants, I've worked with rappers, I've worked with sports teams, I've worked with conferences, energy drink companies. Like it's all over the place. The type of stuff that I get to do, and I this was exactly what I was hoping for.
I mean, it's crazy. You must think about it sometimes, like going from, you finish school and then not too long after you're working at Subway, you're working at an Apple
Yeah.
store, and then to be where you are now. I mean, that for anyone listening should be so inspiring that even if, you might find yourself having a rocky start or you have low points. I mean, you look at someone like you now and you're working with, all of the professional sports teams in Atlanta, all these big names in your city and beyond. It's crazy. I mean, you couldn't ask for much of a better sort of success story.
And success is different for everybody, what might be like the most amazing thing for me might be like, oh, it's okay for, for somebody else, and that's fine. The one thing that I don't want to, and I struggle with this a little bit when I first started, it's like I know that I can do this. I know that I'm good at what I do. And I know this, and you never feel like sometimes you actually got that chance, that fair chance. But at the same time, it's like, well, you know what? I'm learning this in a different way. I'm doing things a little different. My path is not going to be the same thing as everybody else's, and that's not a bad thing. It's really not. I was accepted to two design schools here in Atlanta upon graduation, and I couldn't afford either one of them. So in my mind, I'm like, well, great, I lost this opportunity and that opportunity, but now I'm teaching at those schools. I've spoken multiple times there. I have, you know, I've mentored a couple kids from there. Like it all comes full circle, but you don't know when that's going to happen. So it's, oh, I don't have this opportunity. That's fine. Find another one. And in my mind, if I could go back and say, oh, I could go to this school and do all this stuff, or I could kind of forge the way that I did, I wouldn't change a thing. And that's just hindsight. But to be completely honest, I like where my stock is, you know, whether going there or not, I kind of like where my stocks ended up.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
So it's, yeah, I mean, it's not to say it wasn't hard. It's not to say that I haven't struggled with the repercussions of some of that through my career. I mean, and I've not really talked about this, but it's been difficult, really since everything happened back in Noonan with the whole eviction and everything like that. I start to think about that, and then it's like, oh, you're using it as fuel or whatnot, but then you start to use it in the wrong way, and then you start to go, you know, you don't sleep, you don't eat, you don't take care of yourself, like, stuff like that, because, you just don't want to get back to that point again. And that's something that I've had to deal with, more recently, sitting down and talk to somebody about that. It's it's different for everybody, but I I don't know. I I'll never forget that, but I won't be, controlled by thoughts of what could happen or what might happen because of that, you know,
Yeah.
because of that whole bit, back in noon, and that won't happen anymore. Um, and it's made things easier for me, just to say I'm past that. I'm way past that,
Yeah.
It's like there's no reason to dwell on that. So yes, I've had some really rough, goings and stuff like that. Yes, it, made me what I am today, and I'm thankful for that. But um anybody who's had experiences like that, whether you dwell on them, whether it's for fuel or whether it's, just can't get away from that, it's hard because it's different for everybody. But I know that for me, you know, being able to move past some of that and not let it control or, you know, determine what I want to do. It's not an easy thing at all, but I'm working on it.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. So when you say like using it as fuel in the wrong way, you mean like overworking yourself, not taking care of
Yeah, I
yourself.
mean, I go without, like I said, no sleep, no
Yeah.
nothing. I mean, and I'm turning out good work. So I mean, it's not like,
Right.
people online or social media or in person, they see the final product. Oh, he doing this or doing that, and they see that. But the moment they find out what actually went into that, that's when, you know, that's when folks kind of start separating themselves. You appreciate the final, but, kind of, you know, when you start talking about what it took to actually get there, I was willing to do that, so that was never a question. But obviously there's some things I would, wish I could go back and change, but, I can't, unfortunately. But I move on, I become better, become stronger. I become a better designer, better dad, better, good dad, good husband, I want to keep improving with that just as much as I do with my work, if not more. So that's it's something that everybody's got to come to terms with in their own way. For me, it's one thing, for somebody else, it's something completely different. Um, but in the end, you know, you got to make that choice.
Yeah. So, wow, yeah, no, that's so interesting, and I'm glad that you talk about this because I wanted to talk to you about, you were vocal about, you work hard, you put in a lot of hours. It takes a lot of work to get all the things done that you do, and you do a lot, and we can get to that. But just sticking on this kind of like finding that balance, what are some things, that you're doing now, whether it's like strategies that you have or what your sort of day-to-day looks like in terms of like still working hard,
Oh,
but
well, of course.
finding that balance of, still, being a good dad and a good husband and taking care of yourself.
Yeah.
What does that look like now?
It's it's just a day-to-day thing. There's no one thing that works every single time. It's constantly moving, constantly changing, so you have to be willing to adapt. Um, I think, you know, I'm being more, when you start your career, it's you take every job, you take every meeting, you drop everything to do this and that and that. I'm not in that position anymore. So if I say I can't, we'd like to do this, want to do that, I can't meet for a week. I can't meet for 2 weeks. I can't, this is not a project that I can take on right now. I can put you on a waiting list, but I can do that. So I'm watching what I'm doing and who I'm working with. You trust your gut and you say, hey, something doesn't quite smell right about this. And every single time I've said something like that and taken the job, it's always come back to bite me. So really paying attention to that. Um, to hiring out things that I don't need to be doing. Like I'll give you an example. I haven't cut my grass in 2 years.
Right.
I've hired that out. Um, there's other things here and there that we've done, but it frees that up. It frees me up to focus on creating, and then, which in turn frees me up when I'm done for the day, to be present, which is something um, I've done a lot better on. And, you know, it's, uh, it's a different thing, and I know that, listeners are probably wanting to talk about projects and stuff like that, or, cool stories, or, crazy stuff, but this is the reality. This is, everybody sees all the cool stuff and everything like that, but it's all the behind the scenes things that's the real reality of this industry. It's different for everybody. This is my story, but I try to keep a routine. We try to set aside certain days are for this, certain days are for that. I don't take in-person meetings on these couple of days. And it's worked out really well. I mean, we're coming up on 8 years I've been running the studio. 8 years. I mean, I didn't think I'd make it to one, and now we're, you know, by the next presidential election or whatever, we'll be coming up on a decade. But it's a process. Don't be afraid to make changes. Yes, stick to whatever you need to stick to, but don't be afraid to make changes. Changes that, good for the person that you're with, your husband, your wife, whatever. um it's a back and forth. There has to be compromise, and it should be that way. And it's something that I'm working really, really, really hard on. But I will say it's made some things easier, and then some of the work that I've been putting out in the last year or two has been some of the best work that I've put out ever. So there's proof that you can, still do that, do the right thing, have that balance, and still put out amazing work.
Man, that's awesome. I really love that you share that. And I think yeah, there's probably listeners who want to talk about the highlights, but I think there's so much value in what you're saying, and just being honest about the the reality of the day to day and the struggles and the changing paths and trying different ideas and seeing what works. And
Yeah.
uh, I think that's super important to talk about. So I really appreciate that.
So what else you got for me? You know, Hit me. You said you had a bunch of stuff, so let's keep this thing going.
Let's do it. So I mean I mentioned earlier, but you do lots of interviews, you do workshops. I actually went to one of your workshops. I don't know if you know or if you re remember, probably not, but it was right at the beginning of the pandemic. You were doing an icon design workshop.
Did I do it? Was that the one with Dribble or the one that I just did myself?
Yeah, I was looking back and I couldn't.
That'd have been around April, like April or May.
I think it was March,
In
March
March.
2020.
Man, that would have been so that would have been my first workshop ever that I did virtually. So you
Oh,
got the first one.
okay.
Yeah, man. I had done a bunch of those in person prior to that. It was always difficult to do it virtually. I actually stopped doing any type of virtual talks or workshops last year.
Hmm.
I just said I'm done. I can't. There's something that happens when you can't interact with people, and on a
Yeah,
personal
for
level.
sure.
There's something where you're just speaking into the mic. There's no feedback. There's no nothing. And whether it's some of the work, whether it's the back and forth, I think that was the biggest difficulty for me during the whole pandemic because I'm a very outgoing person. But you know, I remember we opened up when all the shutdowns were lifted or lockdown was lifted. I remember I had my first in-person meeting a week later, and it was the most refreshing, amazing thing. But I'm not doing the virtual stuff anymore. It needs to be in person. We need to get back to, the back and forth, the face to face, but that's been a big bit for me. But during that time, it worked out really well. Did the workshops. I did dozens of those things during the pandemic. That got me an opportunity to teach at Portfolio Center for a couple of years, to be able to do that. My first year was completely virtual, and then after that was like a hybrid, but it was great. I have to say that the in person was more like it was a lot more intimate. It was more successful, I think, because if you're learning history or something like that, you can just sit there and listen to that. But if you're learning design, you're learning these type of things, you're learning these different types of techniques and official critiques and stuff like that, you need to be sitting in front of the person, or at least looking at them right in the face. Um, but once again, that's just my opinion, but I found some good success with that.
Yeah, yeah.
Doing more this fall, been back to conferences and everything like that. I'm really excited for next month. In about 3.5 weeks, me and a bunch of buddies are heading to a brand new conference in
Awesome.
Austin, Texas. Get to hang with some of those guys. My buddy Alex Center is going to be there speaking. Worked with Alex for a little while now, which has always been fun. But we've never got a chance to meet in person. So I'm very much looking forward to hanging with him and his team and just enjoying Austin, which by the way, I've actually never been before. So
Oh, cool.
I'll be discovering a lot of things, be visiting some studios, a lot more information to come on that later because I'm just way too excited to tell y'all some of the places that I'm going to be able to go and some of the folks I'm going to be able to talk to. But I'm excited. I'm really excited.
Oh man, that's cool. Yeah, I going back to your earlier point about the workshops, like yeah, I was going to lots of these different virtual events at the beginning of the pandemic just because, what else are you going to do, right? But
Right.
totally agree with you on the value of in-person experiences. And
Mhm.
sometimes you got to do what you got to do, but if there's the option to be in person, it makes a big difference. Do you do a lot of your client meetings in person? I know you work with a lot of people in Atlanta, in your city.
So I do most of my meetings in person or Zoom or call. The majority of them are in person, but I actually made a whole deal where if the client is not willing to either jump on a phone call with me or meet in person, then I don't take the job. I need to have that understanding. We need to know what's going on. There needs to be a back and forth.
Yeah.
So so there is that. But and it speaks to a couple of different things. It speaks to not just, hey, are you serious about this? Are you going to you're going to take the time that you need to take to make this thing work? And that kind of shows there at the beginning. And if they're not willing to jump on a phone call with me or meet me or something like that, then what's it going to be like down the road? You know,
Yeah.
I can get more out of somebody in a 10-minute conversation than I can in a 20 email thread. You know,
Yeah, totally.
every logo, every identity, every that I've ever worked on, there is some personal aspect to each and every one. And I've discovered this over the course of my career. So in my mind, not only is it part of what I do and my process and whatnot, but it also makes sense that there's a personal aspect to so much of this. Why would I not sit down and have that talk in person with them? It just makes that type of sense.
No, totally with you on that. And that's awesome that you, I mean, obviously it's so cool that you work with so many of these like local brands and local businesses in your city. And I feel like you have kind of, you're like the guy in Atlanta you've worked with. Like, I mean, are there other, I mean, I'm not, tuned into the Atlanta design scene, but would you say that there's other designers sort of in similar shoes to you who are kind of working with a lot of Atlanta brands?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
there's trust me, I'm a small part of this whole ecosystem over here. There are folks here that just put out amazing work day after day. You got Britt Davis over over at Mercedes-Benz. You've got, was it Larry and them over at, what is it, and Tucker over at, Atlanta United. You've got, good night, my buddy, Brian Steely, just making gig posters and designs like that I can only dream of. There's just some amazing folks to what is it to that work here. I'm just kind of part of that, but you know, it is kind of fun sometimes to say, hey, we thought of Atlanta and we thought of you.
Yeah.
I'm hearing that a little more and more each year. It's always fun, but I like being able to take that kind of Atlanta designer type of attitude and take it all over the U.S. Always fun, always a lot of fun.
All right, let's switch gears here real quick. You're into type design. You've got
Hmm.
some great typefaces that you've made, and I love that, your personality, or I guess your values as a designer like shine through so much. They're very, Scott Fuller-esque typefaces. How did what made you want to get into type design, and how'd you go about learning that?
So I've always done custom type. I've always designed, so much of that, when it comes to logo types and different stuff like that, even when I was in college. It's something that I've always done. Like I said, my dad being a machinist, me doing the mechanical engineering, I'm used to very, very, very precise movements, precise measurements and actions for a very long period of time, right? So for like 7, 8, 9 hours, working, I'm working on stuff in my dad's shop. Most folks measure with a ruler or a tape measure. We measure with a micrometer. They're measuring in quarter inches, eighth inches. We're measuring in tens of thousands of inches, right? Like that's the type of precision, and you have to do it almost just naturally, right? So when it came to type design, there's a lot of folks who are like, man, I just the time to do it and everything like that. For me, it was natural, right? I just, I did this logo design project, and I went a little further. I started making this like custom, typeface looking thing. And of course the client said no, but I loved it and I want to go with it. Well, there was a guy, have you ever heard of Retro Supply?
I don't think so, no.
Retro Supply is Dustin Lee. He's out of the Portland out of the Oregon area, right? And he runs this amazing thing, retrosupply.com. And he and I met at a conference. I showed this to him and it was right up his alley, right? So he actually commissioned me to finish the typeface. and we did this whole thing. I was featured on Good Type, like all these different things. We made specimen posters and whatnot, and then I was just hooked, and I started making more typeface. I think I'm up to like a dozen or something right now. But then in 2020, I caught the eye of a guy by the name of Neil Summer, who runs a type foundry called Positype. It's been around for like 25 something years. And he was starting this thing called Flourish, and it was type designers, up and coming type designers from around the world. And he chose me as the US representative, which I thought was pretty cool. So I've learned a lot with him. I've released some new typefaces in the last couple of years. I'm working on the biggest one that I've ever done in my career right now. Probably won't be done till like the end of next year or something like that. But I'm really excited about that one. But it takes time, it takes energy, it takes thought, it takes that really, really, paying attention and being precise and making little adjustments. It's like I make an adjustment to the C. Now I have to make the same adjustment to the G, to the J, to the O, Q, but all of these in all these different things. So you have to think across the entire typeface, when you're working on these things. But it's been a fun ride for me for sure.
One last topic.
Okay.
You've got a great studio. I know it has moved around a little bit, hence the name, I guess. But a solid collection of design books I've seen in these pictures of your studio. If you were to recommend a couple books to graphic designers, maybe specifically younger graphic designers who are getting into it and learning, what would be your recs for design books?
Oh my goodness. I mean, it's different for everybody. I mean, I've got stuff from CSA, I've got stuff from like the 1960s. I've got everything from Milton Glaser to James Victori to Unimark, Vignelli and whatnot, to
Yeah, yeah.
Malcolm Greer, who probably had the biggest influence on my career. Um, Anything that Lance Wyman puts out, of course, I'm going to grab. I recently came across Pentagram's first ever book from 50 years ago. I found a first edition of that, and now Unit Editions is coming out with a 50th anniversary bit for them, which of course will be grabbing the moment that goes live. Um, but it's been as far as books, look at books, get inspired. That's great. It's different for each one. I would very strongly suggest, if you're looking for a good base, looking for a good foundation in your work, start looking like 1970s and back. You know what I mean? Like with super simple shapes, they make these brands that have been around for 40, 50 years, things that I look at and just scratch my head and like, how did they do that? And I look at that as a base, right? I see the world in shapes. I don't know where that came from, but I see the world in shapes. Everything I look at, that's how I see. That's why my identities are kind of the way they are. It's like I said, it's different for everybody, but don't be afraid to get out in life too. Just constantly be looking around you. Stay off. I have don't get me wrong, there's some places I go online to look at some things, and that's great, but you know, stay off of, Pinterest, or like some of this other stuff, like get out in the real world, see what's going on out there. You go on these things that are curated, by all the what is seemingly cool stuff. And then it's like, well, that's cool. I'll do kind of like what everybody else is doing, or, what's this fad or this trend or whatnot like that. The work that I'm doing right now, and as much as I possibly can, is devoid of trends, fads, any of this type of stuff. I build designs that are built to last, right? I recently changed my kind of tagline from good design wherever I happen to be to an iconic design studio. That's what I'm going for. I'm building iconic brands, and I'm enjoying that. But I got to that point by learning the basics to a crazy degree, and understanding the basic building blocks that I can build in just about any style that I need to, you know but understanding that, so whatever book that happens to be, I'll leave that up to y'all. I would absolutely suggest that you start looking, mid to late, 1950, 1970, right in that era. There's some amazing things right there that still work just as well today, if not better than they did, all those years ago. But find what works for you and go for it. The books that I get inspiration from might do nothing for y'all. So go out there, find what you like, find what works for you, and and make it your own. Build your own thing and enjoy it. Take the time to master your craft, to continue to build on it, and sooner or later, folks are going to start knocking on your door.
That's beautiful. Oh man. Well, Scott, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. I seriously really appreciate it.
Yeah, man, for sure. I enjoyed it. Man, keep up the good work, the podcast and everything like that. And if you need anything, just hit me up.
Thank you guys so much for listening to today's episode of the Graphic Design is Fun podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, you can leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It helps others find the show, so it would be very much appreciated. If you have any feedback, any suggestions, or just want to say hello, you can shoot me a message at Dan Allen Studio on Instagram or Twitter. If you love the podcast, if you hate the podcast, whatever you got, I would love to hear it. And yeah, that's it. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.